Welcome back to Service to School Stories. I'm your host, Sydney Mathis, Director of Student Success here at Service to School. As a former college admissions officer and the spouse of an active duty service member, I'm excited to dig into topics within the higher education landscape as it relates to veterans and transitioning service members. Let's dig in. Ivey is joining us today. She is one of the co-founders of Service to School here. Anna grew up in Germany and worked as a film finance lawyer in LA before serving as Dean of Admissions at the University of Chicago Law School. She's currently based out of LA. She's been volunteering with veterans applying to college and graduate school for over a decade. Anna, one thing I want to talk to you about in a little bit, one of my husband's coworkers actually worked with you. So he was super excited when I told him I was coming on Service to School. But Anna also has a bachelor's degree from Columbia University and a law degree from U Chicago. She's also the author of 2 books. First, How to Prepare a Standout College Application and the Ivey Guide to Law School Admissions. And now she runs an education technology startup called Inline Coach. So Anna, thank you so much for spending some time with us today to chat a little bit about Service to School and how you started this incredible organization that we are now so thankful to be a part of. But to start us out, I introduced you a little bit from the information that I have, but I'd love to hear your, backstory and how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah. So as you were alluding to before, I'm a recovering lawyer. I don't practice law anymore, but it's still certainly part of my background. And after I in admissions, I worked in Stanford for a while in development. So I'd been sort of swimming around in higher ed for a while. And then as I was running an admissions consulting business, veterans or active duty service members started finding me, asking for application help. And I was so excited to hear from them. And I thought this would be a perfect way for me to do volunteer work that I really care about. And so I was just very lucky in that I didn't have to sort of find them. They just started showing up. And so over time, I just developed this volunteer practice working with veterans. And it was a learning curve for me in that as a civilian, and I'm the only civilian on the founding team, everyone else is a veteran. As a civilian, there's so much translation that needs to happen when veterans are applying to whether it's college or grad school, because the audience of admissions officers are typically not from the military. And so, as you know, these are somewhat different languages and customs and sort of unstated assumptions. And so over time, I just learned more and more about how that translation works and how to advise veterans when they're basically positioning themselves and selling themselves to this audience. Also learned a lot about sort of military culture and how that sometimes is at odds with the admissions process in the following way, and you all know better than I do. The idea of selling yourself as an individual and selling your individual accomplishments is just countercultural for people who've come through the military, right? Where it's all about team and this is not on you as an individual. And so I could tell that just felt really uncomfortable for applicants who had been in the military. But this process was really sort of expecting that and requiring that. And so that was another sort of part of my education, and theirs too, about, how do you sell yourself in this process when you're sort of deeply uncomfortable with doing that in the first place. So it's been a really interesting learning experience for me. And after I'd been doing it for a while, I crossed paths with my other co-founders, and the immediate goal that really unified us was we were seeing so many veterans being preyed on by the for-profit industry. And I put higher education in scare quotes when it comes to some of these for-profit players, just because they call themselves a college doesn't mean they're for real, or that your quote unquote diploma there is going to be recognized in a meaningful way. And so we thought, you know what, in theory, the legislature should be dealing with this, the Department of Education should be dealing with this, but as we now know, over 10 years later, that's been a very slow process.
Slow process.
Yeah, we're not going to wait for some sort of legislative fix to this. We're going to form a nonprofit and try to find service members and veterans and mentor them through this process, and mentor them about how higher ed works, if they're not already familiar with it, so that they don't turn over all of their education benefits to some outfit that is just going to basically be a diploma mill and give them a phony degree that
they can't do anything with later down the road.
And so many people had to learn that the hard way. And so that was really the biggest problem that inspired us to form Service to School, because that struck me. Certainly, I don't want to speak for the others too much, but certainly it struck me as what should have been a national scandal.
Yeah.
And I think increasingly it's being recognized. And as you know, in the current administration, you're finally starting to see some debt forgiveness for some of those folks who
were preyed upon
in those diploma mills. So that was really the origin story of how we came together to form Service to School. And over to, at the start, it was the four of us kind of trying to do everything. And fortunately, we have outgrown that mode, and we have a wonderful team now, of which you are an important part. And so the original founders are still on the board, but we're not as involved day to day anymore.
Sure.
Highly competent people running it on the ground now, which is fantastic.
Yeah. So you mentioned, were the other three co-founders, were they students that you worked with, or how did you all kind of cross paths?
I had just, I believe all three of them went to West Point, and and that's they're pretty tight.
Yeah. Small community.
So, I was just put in touch with people, since I already knew some folks in that alumni community. So it was really mutual introductions.
Yeah.
Because I think people who knew all were kind of focused on the same problem and trying to figure out a good solution that could actually scale.
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great segue into my next question. So when you all first were, talking through what Service to School was going to look like, what was that vision starting out? Because I imagine it's very different now from that vision. Obviously, the mission is still the same and essential to the work that we're doing. But what did you all envision for Service to School?
Yeah, I think because each of us individually had been just doing sort of volunteer work on the side, helping veterans as they were applying to school, we realized, that's all well and good, but that really affects such a small number of people. There's only so many people we can actually work with one-on-one.
Yeah.
It's not really a scalable model at all. And so we decided it needed to be a peer-to-peer model who had come through our program and come through our process, had learned how this works, and would be in a position then to pay it forward and in turn mentor other veterans coming up through that system. We do, of course, have some full-time folks who are overseeing all that volunteer staff. And as with any volunteer group, and this is not unique to Service to School at all, if you had just volunteers, the big challenge is, how do you do quality control? How do you do standardization? I'm sure people who've worked in the military are familiar with those concepts as well, right? Something that we had to build around to make sure that we had a staff in place that could do that kind of quality control, that kind of standardization, make sure that people didn't just sort of fall through the cracks in our intake pipeline. And that always is a work in progress. That can always be improved on. We're always kind of operationally trying to figure out how to improve things. I would say where we have expanded beyond the original model is that, and this is always a source of some really rich internal discussion on the board too, is ultimately our enlisted service members and veterans. Service to School from the beginning has also always worked with officers and also any veteran applying to graduate school. But ultimately, we think we have the most value to add for enlisted applying to undergrad.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, that is still our bread and butter.
Mhm.
But over time, we've expanded on the grad school side. First it was MBA, then it was law school, and then some medical degrees got added and other kinds of grad school. So that has morphed over time. And like any organization with finite resources, both human and financial, we always have to ask ourselves, at what point do we risk spreading ourselves too thin
Yeah.
and getting too far away from our original mission of helping enlisted get into college? So that's always an ongoing tension is too strong a word, but sort of a balancing act that we strike. And when we're out fundraising and figuring out how to pay for all this, it also has to be reflected in our messaging,
Mhm.
which demographics really are our primary mission.
Yeah.
And so the message there is pretty clear.
Mhm.
We love helping people get into grad school, but ultimately the value add is biggest for helping enlisted get into undergrad.
Sure. And at what point did you all think to bring on kind of the VetLink partnership? So,
Mhm.
VetLink being our partner institutions, several at the undergraduate level that are incredible institutions across the country, but also looking to those partnerships at the grad level. At what point were you all thinking about, establishing partnerships across the different graduate tiers?
Yeah, so we have, for those people who don't know in the audience, we have these official partnerships with various universities, both for undergrad programs and increasingly some grad school programs as well. And it gives us a direct relationship with the admissions officers at those schools. So, for example, if you were a 17-year-old back in high school, you would probably have a school-based counselor who would have direct contact to any admissions officer at a school that you apply to. But if you're a non-traditional student, you've already graduated, high school is somewhere in your past, you don't have a school-based counselor with that direct line to the admissions office. And so by establishing official partnerships with these programs and their admissions offices, it really allows us to play some of that function where we can also facilitate the relationship. And some of those programs also use what we call our VetLink addendum, where it adds a little bit more context about the military component to the application. Again, for an admissions office population that is typically civilian. So we sort of try to bridge that gap with our VetLink partnerships. The partnership started off on the undergrad side with undergrad programs, and then over time we expanded to some graduate programs as well. And it's been a wonderful relationship because we also are able to serve as a pipeline
Hmm.
for those schools. Schools have different institutional priorities, but if a school makes it a priority to start recruiting veterans and enrolling more veterans into their programs, that's easier said than done.
Yep.
And so in some ways, and the relationships can be different with different schools, but some of them do then look to us to help them with that pipeline
Hmm.
and source qualified veterans, mentor them through the process, and allow these programs to enroll more veterans. But that also means helping them find qualified veterans and sort of shepherding them through this kind of funky process. I mean, the
Yeah.
process is weird for everybody. Civilian
Hmm.
or military doesn't matter. It's an odd system.
It is.
So
Yeah.
that's the history of the VetLink partnerships. The number of schools that are partnering with us has just been growing over time, and it's been a valuable addition to the service that we're able to offer both to our applicants, but arguably also to those participating schools.
Absolutely. I tell all the applicants that I onboard and talk to when I'm explaining the VetLink addendum to them. When I worked in admissions, I was at George Washington University and I worked with our veteran student population, and we didn't have anything like the VetLink addendum.
Yeah,
And as you know, the common application is not very, I want to say, adult learner friendly.
right.
There's nowhere to really explain what you've been doing in your job or in your career. It's just not built for the adult learners. So that's exactly what I explained to our population who are looking to submit a VetLink addendum. As I said, this is incredible context that I wouldn't gain anywhere else in your application. And I just think of how useful that tool is when I'm trying to understand what someone's MOS is or what they've been doing, the
Mhm.
last 8 years of their life. It's
Yeah.
just, I mean, the impact that you can have when you're trying to understand the context of the student and the student's environment. I mean, without the VetLink addendum, you're
Yeah.
missing a whole part of their background. So,
Yeah, and it's so important, and it's not really sort of an official role we play, but I would say an unofficial role as well, is that we do some educating of admissions officers
yeah.
about how to read an application from a service member, if it's not a population they're used to dealing with in
Mhm.
their process. And I'm not naming any names, but I remember back when we first started, which was about 10 years ago. This is a school everyone has heard of. Um, the admissions officer pulled me aside, or one of the admissions officers pulled me aside, and she'd been in that role for a long, long time. And she sort of, in a very polite way, she basically became clear she didn't really understand the difference between enlisted and an officer.
Yeah.
And so she was surprised that she wasn't really seeing a whole lot of applications from officers. And we sort of talked about why that would be, but sometimes the misunderstandings are that basic.
Oh, yeah.
And so to the extent that we can help schools really focus on some best practices and understand some terminology and just sort of the 101 aspect of this particular demographic admissions
Yeah.
profiles, I would say that's an important part of what we do as well. Although I don't think it's something that we really showcase a whole lot, but I think it's important. It's an important aspect.
Absolutely. And I've brought that up to the team before that I would love to see a world where universities, admissions offices are coming to us and saying, "Hey, can you help us understand, what this, how to one, either better retain the student population or how can we, enroll more veterans on our campus?" It's just like you said, that education piece. It's lacking going both ways too, because sometimes when I'm talking to applicants and I'm like, okay, you can go early decision or regular decision. And they're like, I had no idea that there were different application deadlines, or,
Right.
oh, I can't apply to college right now if I'm intending on going in 2025. Like,
Right.
you know,
Right. Yeah.
that to us in the admissions world seems so simple,
Right.
right? But to
It
them
seems so
is,
obvious, and to other
yeah.
people it isn't.
So the
I think that's
education
right.
piece could absolutely go, both ways.
Yeah.
But obviously we're a small team, so
I
however we
know
can.
we're a lean, mean operating machine. I will say that when we first started out, there were some well-known ones who did not have a lot of veterans in their undergrad population, and we had some very frank conversations with them, um, along the lines of, well, first of all, not all of them accepted transfer applications when
Yeah.
we started. And so we had some questions around how if you're not open to non-traditional students, if you're not open to transfer students, you're basically saying to any kind of non-traditional student, and to include veterans,
Hmm.
that they're just not part of your process and they're not part of your student body.
Yeah.
And if that's the message you want to send, and if that's your institutional set of priorities, then that's certainly your prerogative. But in a world where even people within their ecosystem, trustees, students, the media, are paying attention to diversity, it's defensible if you have no veterans or you have two veterans in your undergrad population. And how is it defensible that you're sitting there studying the Peloponnesian Wars or what have you, or you're studying the Iraq Wars, and you don't have a single veteran participating in that conversation? How is that defensible?
Yeah.
In the current era. And to their credit, some of them really did steer that ship around, and have really changed their systems and their policies. But that's really what we were starting with a lot of
Hmm.
the time. Um, Now, there's some colleges that have, from the very beginning, been very welcoming of veterans.
Sure.
The Columbia School of General Studies was formed right after World War II in order to educate returning GIs, basically.
Hmm.
So that is baked into their whole origin story, and so Columbia campus, ever since World War II, has had plenty of veterans, and that was never anything strange. But certainly among that range of schools, that was not the norm.
Sure. Yeah, and I heard someone, and I don't remember who it was in one of our conversations, was saying, service to school will have served its purpose when we no longer need the VetLink addendum to explain
Mhm,
this process to college admissions offices. And while that, is certainly would be an incredible day when we can, say no longer do we need to have this special tool to be able to help you understand this population. I just I even at that point, it's like this population is going to continue to evolve. Like we hear
mhm,
Jim, Selby talk all the time with our VetLink partner schools about how the veteran student today looks very different from the veteran student, that they might have seen applying years before, as
mhm,
policy changes and international relations changes, like the makeup of the student veteran is going to continue to evolve as well.
mhm.
So I just hope there's never a world where we no longer need the VetLink addendum because that means, we as a community and especially higher ed, we've stopped evolving and stopped trying to better understand populations that themselves are continuing to evolve. It's just been so interesting to hear from our partners, their
Mhm.
perspectives and how they've shifted, like you said, since, 2011 when we first started.
Yeah.
I've only been at services school for a year, so I've been, like watching on the sidelines. But to even just see those conversations happening is just so exciting for I
Yeah,
think for our student veterans, but also for those of us who are just, higher ed nerds in general who love to
absolutely.
track this space.
Look, I think it could cut either way, honestly. I think we've among the founders, we've always said we would love to be unnecessary. We would
Hmm.
love to be obsolete. In order for that to be the case, though, it would have to be so normal for veterans to be not just going into higher ed, but also into sort of the highest reaches of higher ed,
Yeah.
right? That we become unnecessary. And I don't know, maybe that day arrives for some other demographics, but um, we're certainly not quite there yet. And that's another internal conversation we've always had from the beginning, which is we want to help veterans get into sort of any legitimate
Hmm.
undergraduate program.
Yeah.
It doesn't have Harvard, it doesn't have to be Duke or Stanford or any of these schools that most, that get all the get all the attention,
Yeah.
that have these, rock
Single digit
solid
admit rates.
ratings. Um, we want to make sure you don't end up at a diploma mill, you don't end up wasting your education benefits on something that isn't going to benefit you. And so, in that sense, we're not school snobs. At the same time, we've always been cognizant of the fact that there is a real civilian military divide
Hmm.
at large, certainly in the corridors of political power, where really important decisions get made that also affect people in the military and
Sure.
their families. And are we okay as a society with veterans being sort of left out of those corridors of power?
Yeah.
And some of that social capital gets formed in college.
Yeah.
And so, for veterans not to be part of that ecosystem, um, and that kind of career path and that kind of networking struck us as a real problem.
Hmm.
Veterans in those reaches as well, but that's not to say we are somehow looking down our noses at service members who are going to, a less famous school.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. And that's definitely something that, you know, we I don't want to say struggle with, but it's in those conversations sometimes when, I'm onboarding an applicant and they're like, well, I just want to go to a good school. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, good is subjective. What's good for you
Right.
might be, a shot in the moon or a shot in the stars for someone else or the reverse. Um, and then it's, not everyone are getting into some of those highly selective schools.
No, most people don't, including most civilians. I mean, it's
Right.
a really long shot for just about anybody.
Yeah. So it's also that education piece kind of like that you were alluding to again is that we just want you to go somewhere where you can can thrive, where your degree is going to be meaningful, where you're going to be exposed to all of those incredible opportunities. And sure, you those bumper sticker schools, those top 20 schools are incredible places where that happens. But what are your options if you don't get, an acceptance letter from one of those schools? Um,
Yeah.
it's just,
Having a diversified college list is important
yeah.
for anyone applying to college. That's certainly. Um, and there's always a balance to be struck. I mean, with applicants, very often they're not aiming high enough, in my
Hmm.
opinion, and we see that sometimes with first generation applicants, for example. Um, but there are also people out there who are not whose college list is not balanced enough, and
Yeah.
they're almost certainly going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think anytime one is advising people applying to college of any background, any age, that's a really important part of the conversation, is sort of thinking about what that list should look like and making sure that, you've covered your various bases.
You mentioned something there that I don't think we've talked about, right? So we have mentioned educating on just like the process and the murkiness and the nuances. But one thing that I've found that is also just incredibly rewarding is when I'm talking to an applicant and you kind of hear their tone and the shift in their conversation change when they're like, oh shoot, I can do this. It's that confidence building piece. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to an applicant the other day and he was like, yeah, he was a Navy nuke, had like a 3.9 high school GPA. He had recently taken the SAT after 8 years out of the classroom and scored a 32. And he was like, I just don't know if this is enough. And I was like,
Right.
are you serious? It's like, there's kids straight out of high school who aren't even scoring a
There are people who would
32,
kill for that score.
and to
Yeah.
think about your hands-on experience. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, you did well in high school and you've been trusted with a very tough, exhausting career. I mean, to hear me give him that light bulb moment and for it to,
Mm-hmm.
to click for him,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it was just so, those are the moments that you're like, we need more of these, more of
Mm-hmm.
the confidence in their potential and their outcomes post military, because I think a lot
Yeah.
of our service members just that's what they've known, that's what they've been doing, and to finally hear that you can go to some of these really great schools. um
Important to be able to see people who've done it.
yeah.
Um, That's always important. But one thing you're making me think of is that, historically in our our 10 years, we haven't had a huge budget for marketing or PR. And so we've really relied on the veterans we've worked with to help
Hmm.
us get the word out that we are here as this free resource.
Yeah.
We don't spend millions of dollars on advertisements on television, and you know exactly which ones I'm talking about.
Hmm.
Right? You don't see us doing that on TV.
Yeah.
We spend all of our budget on, operations and actually, serving um, these applicants directly. But there's a downside to not having a marketing and PR budget and not spending a bunch of resources on that,
Yeah.
because it does make us dependent on the people we have worked with to basically help us go viral.
Yeah.
And even among the board, we go to events. I've done a lot of events, for example, at Camp Pendleton,
Hmm.
um, and every once in a while at Miramar too, because I'm based out in California. So the board members kind of divvy up different events in different parts of the country that we can go to, and different conferences and things. But we're not that many people, so
Yeah.
so that's sort of an ongoing issue that we have to sort out, because ultimately we don't want to be a tree falling in the forest and not enough people are hearing us, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's what, whenever I'm always asking people, how did you hear about service to school? And it'll be, word of mouth is the most common.
Right.
But it's always really exciting when they're like, oh yeah, I heard you all mentioned on a podcast. And I'm like, tell me more.
Yes.
Who did you talk to there?
Right.
Or, they were reading about, some news article, and that's always really exciting when it's okay, we
Mhm.
can, spread
Mhm.
spread like fire if we, are in those.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of us sort of a moment that it initially was a bit demoralizing, and then it was just very inspiring to us, in terms of motivating us was I forget, there was some matching program out there. It was like a matching competition where if you raised X number of dollars for your veteran organization, this foundation would match you dollar for dollar. And so we were excited about this, but we also knew we were competing against all these other veterans organizations. And then when the winners were announced, I think ahead of us were something like 6 veterans organizations that were all around service animals. And I'm an animal lover. I've for a long, long time. I mean, I'm a sucker for,
Yeah,
any logo that has the military animals on them. But at the same time, we thought, oh my God, like we're helping people
people.
and we're like rock bottom on this list,
Yeah.
way behind all the animals. And we thought, oh, we need to do better at getting this word out. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's something we're mindful of and where we can use all the help we can get.
Sure. Yeah. I know as a team, that's something we're always, chatting and trying to think strategically about is how can we get in front of more veterans, in front of more people to just share the good
Mhm.
work that we're doing. So ongoing conversations I imagine we'll, keep having and keep adapting, but it is it's just an exciting, exciting field to be in. So there's, always room for improvement when that's the case.
And when we started this, nobody else was filling this particular niche.
Hmm.
And there's some wonderful organizations that are very adjacent to ours, and they've been wonderful partners with us. I mean, for years, we've been partnering with Warrior Scholar Project.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, that all came to a halt. But pre-COVID, I used to travel to their various sessions that they would have on college campuses, usually in the summer. And I would go give a talk about the admission side of things and talk about
Hmm.
service to school. So we've had some really nice relationships with some of the organizations that sit adjacent to us and it's important to us that an organization like that exists because it's not doing anyone any favors to like get you in the door at a really good college if then you don't feel academically prepared
Yeah.
or you're sort of lacking the confidence when you
Hmm.
get there. So it was really nice to be able to sort of tackle just this thing that nobody else was doing. So that, okay, they're in good hands after they get
Sure.
in terms of academic preparedness and having that community once they get there. So we're very grateful to these organizations that are, sit very adjacent to what we're doing.
Yeah. And it's just nice to share the work, right? Like they also recognize and notice the gap there, and to know that there are organizations and teams that are all, just wanting to serve the same student population and have recognized the work is meaningful,
Mhm.
is just, it's also helps motivation to continue to want to do more and trying to reach more people when we're all kind of working to achieve that same goal.
Absolutely. And I don't think it was sort of a conscious part of my motivation, but when I think back to when I was in college, I went to Columbia University undergrad, and the Columbia structure is kind of an unusual one in that the students who are at the Columbia School of General Studies, which is typically where the veterans are, they're completely mixed in the same undergrad classes
Hmm.
as students from Columbia College, which is where I was. So for me and any other student at Columbia, it was just a completely normal thing. Studies isn't just veterans. It had like retired ballet dancers and all kinds
Yeah,
of non-traditional students. It has expanded beyond veterans since, the 1940s. But it's hard for me to imagine my undergraduate education without veterans in the classroom. But that's not the experience most people have
sure.
at a good number of schools. And so I think just sort of subconsciously, it was something that I always recognized as having value, not just for veterans, but also for the rest of us
Oh yeah.
in the classroom.
Oh, and that's my favorite part of talking with some of the applicants when, they are transitioning into this new environment. I'm like, think of the lessons and the life experiences you get to share, that you have lived just an entirely, different experience from some of the high school students that are going to be in the classrooms with you. And sure, they're still 18, 19, but their experiences outside of school are so limited.
Yeah.
So to be able to bring in a new perspective that a lot of people don't have, is just, they get really excited about that. And I think that's really
As
cool.
they should. And I think you're really touching on the really great contributions and value of non-traditional students more generally,
Hmm.
meaning, not 18 to 22-year-old,
Yeah.
right? And in fact, we need a new word for it because non-traditional is really the new normal
Yeah.
demographically. So really, it's the 17 to 22-year-olds who are having a full-time residential campus experience that are the outliers,
Yep.
right? But we still talk about them as if that's demographically normal. It's not. It hasn't been
Hmm.
for some time. Um, and so what you're touching on, I think, is the value of non-traditional students, quote unquote, until we find a better word, in that educational environment, of which, of course, veterans are a part, right?
Hmm.
But I think non-traditional in general has a lot to offer in that kind
Absolutely.
of undergraduate setting.
I agree. And yeah, one of our partners actually, she was like, Have you guys found a new word for non-traditional? Because how,
We gotta work on that. We
yeah,
gotta work on it.
how does, I don't want to be labeled as non-traditional, It's like, so
Well,
I've
it's
been
just
leaning,
not accurate. It just doesn't make sense anymore in this
right.
day and age. Yeah.
I've been leaning into adult learner as much as I
Mhm,
can, but
mhm.
yeah, you're right. There's really no good
No, we can do
definition.
better. We'll have to figure something out.
Yeah, that's our next task to tackle, once we get past this one. But looking forward, where do you see service to school going?
Mm, yeah, I think certainly is to scale the number of people we serve
Hmm.
among veterans who are applying to higher education. Um, and in part, that is a function of getting the word out, but getting the word out isn't enough because we also have to be able to support them
Hmm.
just as well as we support, the much smaller number of people that we worked with when we first started. So we always sort of are thinking about how to scale and how to scale thoughtfully.
Hmm.
At the same time, we're also thinking about how to scale the number of partner schools we have to continue to diversify the kinds of schools that we're partnering with
Hmm.
because not everyone has the same priorities or the same needs, in terms of what makes a good college fit.
Yeah.
So that's something we're always thinking about. But yeah, it evolves all the time, right? And so we try not to be too static in how
Hmm.
we think about these things. Um, in some ways, one of the big changes, I mean, for anyone applying to college, to include our service to school folks, the world changed when all these schools went test optional,
Oh yeah.
right? That used to be such a big hurdle, for many people, to include our population that we
Yeah.
we work with. So we're we're constantly sort of maneuvering along with or around all these changes that are happening in the background that are much bigger than what we're doing or just sort of everyone is having to grapple with.
Yeah. Sure. And that's, I mean, I have regular conversations about test optional and should they test, should they not
Oh,
test?
yeah,
And,
it's a complicated analysis, and I wish it weren't so complicated because it's well intended, a school that goes test optional, but in a
mhm.
way, it also just adds complexity because then you have to know how to do this analysis to figure out, should you submit a score and what constitutes a good enough score to submit to this school, maybe, but not that one. It's just adds complication, right? It's more complexity. Um, but I think in terms of thinking really kind of big, we want to be the obvious choice to go to if someone is interested in going to college.
Yeah.
We want them immediately to think of service to school. And hopefully, we also find a way to reach people who don't think they're in the running for college
Yeah.
or don't think they're college bound or they don't think they're college material.
Hmm.
And we might be able to change some of those minds if
Yeah.
that's the right thing for them.
Sure. Yeah, it's just educating them on, what is the benefit? What's your end goal? And is college a part of that, process and getting
Exactly.
to that
And
end goal?
I mean, one of the beautiful things about advising veterans, and that's not always the case, Lord knows, with the college-bound population more generally, is that veterans do have all this funding.
Mm,
I'm not in any way suggesting this is like free money. No, they worked hard for those benefits. They're entitled to every penny, but they do have that funding to put towards school. Your typical civilian, that's a huge hurdle.
oh yeah.
Huge hurdle trying to figure out how to pay for it. So it's a luxury to be working with a population where, for some people it can get tricky, but in general, there's kind of funding that comes along with it. And then there's still some important conversations to be had around, some people have benefits, but then they're maybe still needing to go into debt if they want to attend certain schools. I don't think it's worth going into debt to do that on top of your education benefits, but of course that's their decision to
Yeah.
make. But I think in terms of the finances, certainly that sort of counseling needs to be part of the larger conversation too. But it really is, it takes a whole level of challenge off the plate
Yeah.
compared to civilian applicants, because there are these earned benefits, and it's such a great investment that this country has made in its veterans. And so again, it's just, I think the only issue is, okay, how do we help people deploy that funding in the most thoughtful way and in the way that really is going to get them whatever returns are most important to them.
Right. Yeah. How do they best use those benefits to their advantage as well, right? Like
Mhm.
using tuition assistance versus your GI benefits,
Oh
or even,
goodness.
you
I
know,
remember sitting in I was saying I participated in these events at Camp Pendleton for Marines, and and I would just kind of sit there and listen to other people's presentations too. And I always remembered, like, there'd always be some long presentation on the different kinds of funding and how you get to
Mhm.
use them and what the different criteria are. And I just thought, oh my God, of course this country has made that really complicated.
Yeah.
Because why would we make that simple?
Yeah.
So that's a whole, I don't mean to suggest that that's easy
No,
necessarily to figure out.
by
At
no
least the
means.
money is there. We
Yeah.
just have to be sort of thoughtful about, meeting the various criteria and sort of optimizing the way that those
Sure.
funds get spent. But
Yeah.
yeah, of course, that's not an easy thing either.
No.
No,
And
right. That
it's
would be too convenient.
yeah, and it's also individualized too, right? Like how one service member accesses their benefits, like,
Mhm.
you know, is totally different from another person. But one thing that I do appreciate is the institutions that are seeing value in the veteran student outside of just wanting their GI Bill.
Mhm.
And the schools that are saying upfront, hey, we're going to invest in you as an institution financially, save your GI Bill for graduate school, or
Exactly.
you don't need to use that first before we
Yeah.
supplement. And the schools that show up front that you're interested in me as a person,
Mhm.
not just the bucks that I bring to the table too. Those are the schools where the veterans feel the most valued and where they're going to choose to matriculate. So I would love to see too, the institutions also kind of putting their money where
Absolutely.
their mouth is as well. And
And
yeah, they have this great benefit, but a lot of them
yeah,
want to use it for graduate school or for
right.
something, something else down the road. Maybe they want to transfer it to their family members.
Mhm. Or their kids or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And, I was talking earlier about how admissions officers don't necessarily understand, like, military terminology or how these systems work. I always want veterans to feel like when they're talking with us, anyone at service to school, or any of our partner schools whom we've been trying to sort of educate around best practices, we don't want them to feel embarrassed to say, like, I don't understand what that concept means.
Hmm.
Decision, which was an example you gave earlier, or I'm thinking of a young Marine that came to me at one of my talks, and oh, it was such a wake up call for me because I just did it reflexively. I didn't even think about it. When in my talk, he said, "Ma'am, I don't understand the difference between undergrad and grad."
Hmm.
And I went, "Oh, OMG, yes, I need to step back and define my terms
Yeah.
when I'm throwing words around like that."
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it's gonna take a little bit of effort on everyone's part.
definitely good conversations though from both sides, right? Everyone I think wants to learn. You just kind of don't know what you don't know. So to just keep that in mind that one, admissions is always evolving, right? I've been doing
Mhm.
this work for 11 years and by no means do I even know everything about the admissions process, or our admissions colleagues are constantly learning about the
Mm,
student populations that they're recruiting as well. And just knowing that we can all learn from each other, and just as long as the purpose is to serve a student population and to try and make this process, and I hate referring to it as a process because that implies there's a right or wrong way to go about achieving a bachelor's degree or whatever graduate degree they're going after, but just knowing that we can learn so much from each other as we both try and support this population, I think that's
definitely.
where I hope we all continue to land.
And if there's one message I always try to get across to service members, um, because, I've been in the admissions world, I've been in higher ed in various capacities, and I feel totally comfortable saying more generally that have such high respect for the work you've done,
Hmm.
for the choices you've made. That respect runs really, really deep. And when I've talked to service members, there's almost this sense of like, oh my gosh, they're sitting in this ivory tower and they're sitting in judgment of me. And, they might assume I don't measure up because I don't come from a certain background. And I promise you, and I do not sort of say things just to make people feel better. I promise you, it's the case that every single one of those admissions officers has deep respect
Hmm.
for service, and what you have taken on that so few people in the United States do.
Yeah.
So few people sign up for that. So please, when you're going into that process, whatever the outcome ends up being, understand that they actually have deep respect for you, and they're very happy to see your application.
Yeah. And I think they would echo that same sentiment on it. And that's actually, you just answered my final question that I had for you, was the advice to applicants, be it undergrad or graduate level, for this specific student population. If there was one takeaway from this
Mhm.
conversation that you wanted them to remember, what would it be?
Yeah, and this is so different from the advice I sometimes have to give civilian populations. I would say, um, have some confidence.
Hmm.
Have some confidence. You are an interesting applicant for admissions officers to see. And bonus, you are a grown-up, and I can tell you from the admissions side as well, sometimes that feels incredibly refreshing to
Yeah.
be dealing with grown-ups once in a while. And you don't come with helicopter parents attached typically. I mean, there are just so many wonderful you come with funding. There are just so many wonderful things
Yeah.
about veterans applying, that, as I say, you should really feel, absolutely confident in putting yourself out there. And I know imposter syndrome is a real thing. Everyone experiences it to some degree in different contexts. Um, Imposter syndrome is real in this context too. But to the extent you can just acknowledge it as such, these people actually admire me and are happy to hear from me. Understand that that's actually the God's honest truth.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know everyone's
Thanks,
time
Sydney.
is
I'm trying to remember the last time we had an hour just to sit and chat.
I know.
That never happens because we're always in the weeds with stuff. So that was really fun.
This was an incredible conversation, truly. I look forward to more conversations of the work that we're continuing to do it here at Service to School, and just your expertise and where you've been able to bring the organization. So one, thank you for starting such a meaningful place where I now have the joy of working and get to truly say that I love coming to work every day and supporting our veterans who so deserve the service, and then some beyond what we can even imagine. So
I will say that this has been some of the most interesting work I've done, most rewarding, always keeping me on my toes, always, always meeting the most interesting people. So it's been nothing but good stuff for me.
wonderful. Great. Well, we'll be in touch and we'll hopefully see you soon.
Thanks, Sydney.
All right, take care. That's it for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more Service to School stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, the Director of Student Success, and produced by Amanda DeBias, the Director of Communication at Service to School. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next time and follow us for more on all of your favorite social media platforms.